So we are about to start reading an amazing play that was first performed in 1953. However, it is about some of the earliest Americans, the Puritans. And so understanding the play and understanding the characters, to do that, it's essential that we know something about the Puritans, their culture, their history. So we're about to do that with this presentation. So where does this term come from, Puritan? The Puritans didn't come up with it. It was actually an insult used to mock them. Important background is that this is a time period where a country could decide, hey, we're all going to follow one same religion, which I suppose there are still countries that do that. So for the Church of England, it was the Anglican Episcopal Church. So if you wanted to worship in another way or had a different faith, that wasn't allowed. So this group that was trying to change the Church of England, they were a target and were ridiculed for their beliefs. Check out this satirical cartoon, which is making fun, ridiculing the Puritans that are being portrayed on the right. On the left, we have a picture depicting the Church of England. And just take a few moments and look and jot down in your notes, based on the picture, what about the Puritan style of worship or form of worship were people making fun of, or is the artist making fun of in this cartoon? So one of the things we have to understand is, what disagreements did the Puritans have with the Church of England? Well, at its core, they felt it was too similar to the Roman Catholic Church, and there were some philosophies and rituals or practices in that church that they disagreed with. And kind of a very simplistic way of looking at it was that they thought that style of worship had too much bling. If you think about that cartoon you just looked at, one of the things being mocked by the satirist is this idea that worship could be informal and outside, and that you didn't have to dress up and have a fancy building. And that's something that the Puritans felt was absolutely fine to worship God. So one of the first things we have to understand is, why did the Puritans want to purify the Church of England? Or what about it did they think needed purifying? They felt that the Anglican and Episcopal Church were too similar to the Roman Catholic Church, and they had some disagreements with some of the philosophies and rituals and practices of that denomination. And the first that we'll kind of lead into, and this is kind of a very simplistic way of looking at it, but that church had a little too much bling. When we think about that cartoon you just looked at, one of the things the satirist was poking fun at was the Puritans' belief that worship didn't have to be in a big fancy building with people wearing vestments and robes, that it could be a gathering of people even outside in very informal clothing, and that was still enough. It was still enough for God. In fact, they felt that some of the great cathedrals and rituals and even the dress of priests strayed from how they interpreted worship in the New Testament of the Bible. So on the right, you see more the style of a Puritan church, while on the left, we see kind of some of that bling and grandness that they felt strayed from the heart of worship. Unlike the Roman Catholic or Episcopal and Anglican Church, they didn't believe there needed to be a hierarchy, this whole set of other people that weren't actually part of the direct church community that should be making all the decisions. And when you look at this quote by Daniel Neal, this also shows just that idea of simplicity, that kind of any group of people gathering together, that's all you need, that you don't need a whole hierarchy of leaders above the members of the church for it to be a true form of worship. So in England, with the Church of England, bishops would appoint ministers. Even today in the Roman Catholic Church, we start with the Pope, and then there's cardinals below him, and there's a hierarchy where were much, a lot of the positions occur by appointment. And they felt members of the actual congregation should choose the leaders or the leader of the church. And along with this, they disagreed with this idea. For example, in the Roman Catholic Church, there's a practice where if you are confessing your sins, you might go to confession and talk to a priest and confess your sins, and then the priest would it kind of works as a middle person between you and God, telling you what to do. And they felt the Puritans thought you should just be able to talk directly to God yourself, and that you didn't actually have to go through a priest or a bishop or someone higher, that you alone were enough. So times were difficult for the Puritans. I mean, besides that cartoon, it became more serious, where they were being not just verbally persecuted, but sometimes even physically persecuted, because they were challenging the state religion. And so it was causing great hardship. They were suffering. And so for reasons of wanting to pursue and practice their faith as they wanted to, they left England and came to America in 1620. Now we're going to look at an essential question that is always running through the minds of the Puritans. Am I saved? Am I going to heaven? Or am I damned and going to hell? And it's really important that we have an understanding of how they looked at that question. I think that will help us understand the mindset and the motivations for some of the characters in Arthur Miller's play. Let's look at the beliefs of the Puritans. So on the left, we have what was certain. One, a kind of a dark view of humanity, that we are all born into sin, coming from the fall that we know from the story of Adam and Eve, with the snake and the apple, and because of that decision, that all humans are damned for eternity. And except those that God chooses as the elect, and that those people would be saved. And I was just reading a Puritan clergyman, Thomas Shepard, who was not just a theologian, but also a mathematician. And he predicted, I don't know how, that there was a ratio, that the ratio of the damned to the elect were 1,000 to 1. So, it was a small lottery. This also brings up the fact that the Puritan beliefs were guided by some of the philosophies of John Calvin, and this idea of predestination, that before you were born, it was already determined if you were one of the elect or one of the damned. And so here were the doubts that we see on the right. Am I one of the elect? Am I saved? And how do I know if I am saved? Look at this quote by Puritan leader Benjamin Wadsworth, and just what it says again about the viewpoint of humanity. This is a description he is giving on the nature of children. That isn't to say every single Puritan person held this exact belief, but I think it's, we can see some contrasts with times today when we think about children. So 2 steps thought to discovering the state of your soul was that if you were one of the elect, you would know this, you would have some kind of an emotional experience where you could feel the grace of God, and you would know that you had been chosen. And that after being chosen, that you were reborn, and you would, behave like a saint, that it would be clear in your actions and how you behaved that you were one of the elect. And so the Puritans attempted to live really exemplary lives, that if you were acting like a saint, perhaps you were one. And though this seems contradictory, from everything I've read, even though there was this idea that you're chosen to be one of the elect before you were born, there was still a belief that, how you acted and how you behaved in a way had some impact on that, even though that seems a contradiction, that it was still, um, you couldn't just kick back. And maybe part of it was just that uncertainty, that if you were acting really as you should or following the teachings in the Bible, then maybe it meant that you were one of the elect. Take a second and read this account from Governor John Winthrop's journal that I think demonstrates how difficult it was to constantly be living with that uncertainty. And record some notes about what this excerpt from his journal reveals about how difficult that was. Let's look at some of the other beliefs that were part of the Puritan values. These were really hard-working people. Now, some of that is for practical reasons. They've moved to a new land. This was rough living on the frontier. But they also had, a particular outlook on wasting time as being a sin. Here's an excerpt from a Puritan sermon, which, by the way, a sermon in church for the Puritans could last 2 to 4 hours, and this was time devoted to hard thinking. It would not be unusual that almost everyone in the congregation would be coming with notebook in hand to take notes. But this is a little excerpt on a sermon about the dangers of idleness. Look up that word if you don't know what it means. And look at this figurative language and figure out what is being said here and what it shows about the Puritan beliefs. You can go online and find many Puritan sermons in the public domain online that you can read. There are many about the dangers of the sins of the flesh. And look at that little chart at what that actually means. I think we hear that and we think, sex and hanky-panky, but it's quite broad, all of the behaviors that the Puritans considered to be sins of the flesh. Going along with their disagreement, really, with the Roman Catholic and Anglican Church of England, we see that they really valued simplicity in their architecture, in their fashion. Now, again, some of this is also, practical in terms of where they are living. And be prepared, we'll see this even in the play in terms of how Arthur Miller describes some of the settings, that they're purposely simple in design. The Puritans greatly valued education and reading. Now, still not reading for pleasure, but reading for knowledge. They built Harvard College. And here we have a little excerpt from Reverend Shepherd, who's writing to his son with a great recommendation that is still relevant today. And he signs it in Latin. This would be a time period. It would not be uncommon that young people, namely boys, we're talking about boys getting to go to college and not women yet, but where it wouldn't be uncommon for someone to be schooled in Latin and Greek. So part of Puritan politics seems quite democratic. The Mayflower Compact is really, one of our first democratic documents, and these people were part of designing that document. And yet, the Puritans lived under a theocracy, not how we currently live under our Constitution, where we have some separation between church and state. The religious leaders were the leaders of the community in terms of politics, and it was believed that those considered perhaps to be the elect should be in charge. Now, in terms of deciding who was in charge, this still would be white males, and probably especially those owning property. Women wouldn't be able to be part of that decision making, nor would someone of color. So in this picture and cartoon, we see kind of a stockade, a device known as the pillory on the right, which were devices of punishment, part of the Puritan beliefs in politics, and we'll see this in the play. One of the conflicts that will come up is, the rights of the community versus the rights of the individual. And it was very important to kind of keep everyone on the same page in terms of rules and procedures and beliefs. And those that disobeyed were punished, and often punished publicly. Now, the writing in this time period, we still don't have people writing plays or short stories or novels that are just for enjoyment or entertainment, nor are people reading just for simply entertainment. Most of what we have from this time period are diaries, histories, letters, court transcripts. There was also some poetry, most of it devoted to faith and religion. We're still not in a stage yet in our country where there is kind of creative writing going on to entertain a reader.